The cold silence of space surrounded the escape pod as it drifted through the endless void. Inside, Princess Volary sat motionless, staring at the empty screen before her. The royal insignia of the Volary Empire, once proudly displayed on her armor, had been torn away. She was no longer a princess, no longer anything. Her own people had cast her out. She had always known the Volary were a proud and powerful race, valuing strength above all else. But she had believed that wisdom, strategy, and diplomacy had a place among warriors. She had argued for peace with humanity, warning the Volary High Council that endless war would only bring ruin. They had called her a traitor. The trial had been swift. The council did not debate her fate for long. Exile, a punishment worse than death for a Volary noble. They had not even given her a weapon or supplies, only a broken escape pod and a one-way trip out of their territory. The princess tightened her grip on the armrest, her claws digging into the metal. She had expected to feel anger, rage. Instead, there was only a deep, hollow emptiness inside her chest. A beeping sound broke the silence. She looked up at the console, her sharp eyes narrowing. The pod's life support was failing. Oxygen levels were dropping. Power reserves were running out. She had only a few hours left before the pod would become her tomb. She hesitated. Calling for help meant relying on others, relying on humans. For years, she had studied their ways, how they fought, how they survived, how they endured even when the universe seemed against them. They were unlike the Volary, who valued honor through battle alone. Humans found honor in loyalty, in compassion, in protecting those who could not protect themselves. Perhaps that was why she had admired them. Perhaps that was why she had chosen their path. Her fingers moved swiftly over the controls. She activated the distress beacon, setting it to broadcast on an open frequency. The Volary would never answer her call. But maybe, just maybe, a human ship would hear her before it was too late. The waiting was the hardest part. Hours passed, and the cold of space began creeping into the pod. Her breaths grew shallow, her vision blurred. If no one answered soon, she would never know if her choice had been the right one. Just as her eyelids grew heavy, the console blinked to life. Unidentified vessel, this is Captain Elias Carter of the UEN patrol ship Tempest. You're broadcasting on a human emergency frequency. Identify yourself. A human ship. Volary's heart pounded. Her voice was weak, but steady. This is Princess Volary of the Volary Empire. I request aid. A long silence followed. The humans must have recognized her name. They would know she was the daughter of one of the most powerful Volary warlords, the same warriors who had fought against humanity for decades. Then Elias spoke again, his voice calm but firm. Stand by, princess. We're bringing you in. Volary was barely conscious when the pod was pulled into the human ship's docking bay. The bright overhead lights burned her eyes as the hatch was forced open. Blurred figures in armored suits surrounded her, weapons drawn. She tried to move, but her body refused to obey. She was too weak, too exhausted. The humans spoke in sharp, quick voices, checking her condition, scanning her vitals. Then one of them stepped forward. He wasn't wearing a helmet like the others. His face was strong, lined with experience. His eyes were sharp but not unkind. Captain Elias Carter. Looks like you had a rough trip, he said. Lucky for you, we don't leave people to die in space, even an enemy princess. Volary tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. The last thing she saw before darkness took her was Elias giving an order. Get her to the med bay. Bright white lights shone overhead as Princess Volary slowly opened her eyes. The air smelled different, clean, sterile, unlike the metal halls of the Volary warships she once knew. She was lying on a bed, covered with a thin blanket, and the steady hum of machines filled the air around her. Pain pulsed through her body, but it was nothing compared to the deep ache in her chest. She had lost everything, her title, her people, her home. And now, She was on a human ship. Her sharp golden eyes darted across the room. It was small, filled with human medical equipment. A transparent monitor beside her displayed her vitals, with words and symbols she didn't fully understand. They had treated her wounds. The door slid open with a soft hiss. A human man stepped inside, his uniform crisp but his posture relaxed. Captain Elias Carter. She recognized him from the docking bay, the one who had spoken to her before she lost consciousness. "You're awake," he said, stopping near her bed. His blue eyes studied her carefully, but there was no hostility in them. "How do you feel?" Volary shifted slightly, testing her strength. "Alive," she replied. Her voice was hoarse, but steady. Elias gave a small nod. "Good. We weren't sure if you were going to make it." He glanced at the monitor beside her. "Your oxygen levels were dangerously low when we pulled you in. My crew had to work fast." She hesitated, then looked at him directly. "You saved my life." "Yeah." He crossed his arms. "That's what we do." Volary narrowed her eyes. "Even for an enemy?" Elias sighed, as if expecting that question. "You weren't attacking us. You were in trouble. We don't leave people to die in space, no matter who they are." His words made her pause. That was not how the Auxiliary thought. In her culture, the weak were abandoned and enemies were never shown mercy. But humans were different. Before she could respond, another figure entered the room, a woman with short brown hair, dressed in a medical uniform. "This is Dr. Reynolds," Elias introduced. "She's been overseeing your recovery." The doctor gave Volary a quick, professional look. "Your body is still weak. You need rest." "I don't have time for rest," Volary said, her voice sharper than before. "I need to know where I am. What will you do with me?" Elias met her gaze. "You're on the UN patrolled ship Tempest. We picked up your distress signal near the edge of human space. Right now, we're heading toward Outpost 46, a secure human colony." Volary's heart clenched. A human colony. She had studied human outposts before, strategic locations used to defend against Auxiliary attacks. If they saw her as a threat, she would be locked away or worse. "Are you taking me there as a prisoner?" she asked carefully. Elias raised an eyebrow. "We haven't decided yet." The tension in the room thickened. Volary could see it in his posture. He wasn't sure if he could trust her. And she didn't blame him. A trial of trust. Hours later, after the doctor left, Elias remained in the room, leaning against the wall. His expression was unreadable, but Volary knew he was studying her. "Why were you in that escape pod?" he finally asked. She looked away. "Because my people rejected me." Elias didn't respond immediately. Instead, he pulled up a small device from his belt and tapped on it. A holographic screen appeared, showing a document filled with Auxiliary script and human translations. "We accessed some of your pod's data," he said. "It contained records of your exile. High Command is still analyzing it, but from what we can tell, you were accused of treason." Volary clenched her fists. Of course, they had found the records. She took a slow breath. "I argued for peace with humanity. The Auxiliary High Council saw that as betrayal." Elias tilted his head. "You wanted peace." "Yes." She met his gaze. "I studied your kind. I saw your strength not just in battle, but in unity, in the way you protect each other. My people believe honor comes only through war. I believe honor can be found in survival, in alliances, in..." She stopped herself, shaking her head. "It doesn't matter now. They stripped me of my title. They abandoned me." For a long moment, Elias said nothing. Then he let out a slow breath. "Well," he said, pushing off the wall. "That's not what I expected to hear." Volary raised an eyebrow. "And what did you expect?" He smirked slightly. "That you were a spy, or that this was some kind of trick." She stiffened. "You still think that?" Elias shrugged. Let's just say I'm keeping an open mind." The room fell silent again. Valera could feel the weight of his uncertainty, but there was something else, a small trace of respect. Then, the ship's intercom crackled to life. "Captain, we got incoming ships. Silari patrol vessels." Valera's heart stopped. Elias cursed under his breath and tapped his communicator. "I'm on my way." He turned back to her, his expression serious. "Stay here. We'll talk later." Then he was gone. Valera sat still, her mind racing. The Exilari were here. Had they come for her? Did they know she was still alive? She clenched her fists. She had left the Exilari behind. But now, it seemed they weren't done with her. Alarms blared through the corridors of the UEN Tempest, flashing red warning lights casting long shadows on the metallic walls. Princess Valera sat up in her medical bed, her golden eyes narrowing as she listened to the intercom. Silari patrol ships had arrived. She swung her legs over the side of the bed, ignoring the dull ache in her muscles. A part of her had known this would happen. The Exilari never left loose ends. The door to her room slid open, and a security officer stepped in, pulse rifle in hand. His stance was tense, but his expression wasn't hostile, yet. "Captain Carter wants you on the bridge," he said. Valera hesitated. They didn't lock her in a cell. They didn't treat her as a prisoner. Even now, with her people outside, they were letting her move freely. That meant they were still unsure about her. She nodded and followed the officer, her mind racing. If the Exilari had come for her, what would she do? Would she run? Would she fight? Or would she help these humans? The bridge, a meeting of wills. The bridge of the Tempest was a controlled storm of movement. Crew members worked at their stations, data flowing across their monitors. Captain Elias Carter stood in the center, his expression calm, but Valera could see the sharp focus in his eyes. On the main view screen, 3 Exilari patrol ships loomed against the blackness of space. Their sleek, curved designs were unmistakable, their deep crimson hulls reflecting the distant light of a nearby star. The communications officer turned. "Captain, incoming transmission from the Exilari lead vessel." Elias nodded. "Put it through." The screen flickered, then the image of a Exilari commander appeared. His pale violet skin was marked with ceremonial scars, and his sharp, silver eyes locked onto Valera the moment he saw her. Commander Xizan. She knew him well. He had once been one of her father's most loyal warriors. Elias crossed his arms. "You're in human space, Commander. State your business." Xizan barely acknowledged him. His gaze was fixed on Valera. "Princess," he said, his voice deep and smooth. "You live." Valera held his gaze. "You sound disappointed." Xizan's expression didn't change. "You know why we are here." "I do," she said. "You came to silence me." A murmur rippled through the human crew. Now they knew the truth. Elias raised an eyebrow. "Is that right?" Xizan finally turned to him. "This matter does not concern humans. Hand her over, and we will leave peacefully." Valera felt the weight of every human's eyes on her. This was the moment of truth. Elias exhaled slowly, then looked at her. "What do you want to do?" She was surprised. He was giving her a choice. Xizan frowned. "Do not play games, human. She is Xilari. She belongs to us." Valera clenched her fists. "I do not belong to you anymore." The bridge went silent. Xizan tilted his head, as if he had misheard. "You would choose Exile. You would choose them." Valera stepped forward. "They saved me. You abandoned me." Her voice was steady, but inside, her heart pounded. Xizan's expression hardened. "Then you are a traitor." The screen went dark. The tension on the bridge thickened. A crew member spoke up, his voice urgent. "Captain, the Exilari ships are locking weapons on us." Elias didn't hesitate. "Shields up. Prepare for evasive maneuvers." Valera turned to him. "You are going to fight for me." He gave her a sharp look. "You're part of my crew now, aren't you?" Her breath caught. his crew. She had never belonged anywhere before. Not truly. But now, standing among these humans as they prepared to fight for her, she made her decision. "I can help," she said. Elias smirked. "I was hoping you'd say that. A new battle. A new path." The auxiliary ships opened fire, streaks of plasma energy cutting through space. The Tempest banked hard to avoid the shots, its shields flaring bright blue as impacts shook the hull. Volary moved quickly to the nearest station, scanning the ship's defense systems. "Your shielding technology is outdated," she said. "If you overload the secondary grid, you can absorb more damage before failure." Elias glanced at her. "Can you do it?" She nodded. If they trusted her, she would not let them down. Her fingers danced across the controls, reconfiguring the power distribution. The shields flared again, but held stronger this time. The weapons officer called out, firing back. Laser cannons on the Tempest roared to life, slamming into the closest auxiliary vessel. The enemy ship's shields flickered, then shattered. A direct hit to its engines sent it spiraling away. Volary felt a strange sense of satisfaction. She was fighting her own kind, but she did not feel regret. Another explosion rocked the ship. "Second auxiliary ship is moving to flank us," a crew member shouted. Volary gritted her teeth. She recognized the maneuver. They were trying to cut off the Tempest's escape route. "I know their attack patterns," she said. "Give me weapons control." Elias didn't hesitate. "Do it." She targeted the enemy ship's propulsion systems. A single well-placed shot could disable them without destroying the vessel. Her hands were steady as she fired. The blast hit its mark. The auxiliary ship veered off course, its engines sputtering. Cheers erupted across the bridge. The remaining auxiliary vessel hesitated, then turned and fled. Silence filled the bridge as the humans processed what had just happened. Elias turned to Volary, a glint of approval in his eyes. "Not bad, Princess." She let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. She had fought beside humans, and she had won. For the first time in her life, she did not feel like an outsider. She felt home. The UN Tempest floated in the vastness of space, its hull still bearing the scars of battle. Inside, the crew moved with energy, talking about how they had just forced the auxiliary to retreat. It was a victory, but everyone knew the fight wasn't over. Princess Volary stood beside Captain Elias Carter on the bridge, watching the damage reports come in. Some systems needed repairs, but the ship was still in good shape. Elias glanced at her. "You fought well back there." She crossed her arms. "I only did what was necessary." He smirked. "That's what a soldier says." Volary frowned. Was she becoming one of them? Before she could answer, the intercom buzzed. "Captain, we've received a transmission from Admiral Reynolds. He wants an update, immediately." Elias sighed. "Of course he does. Patch him through." The main screen flickered, and the image of Admiral Jonathan Reynolds appeared. His gray uniform was crisp, and his face was lined with the weight of command. "Captain Carter," the Admiral said. His sharp eyes landed on Volary. "And the Princess. I heard you had quite the encounter with the auxiliary." Elias nodded. "They came for her. We sent them running." Reynolds didn't look impressed. "That's the problem, Captain. You embarrassed that auxiliary military. They won't forget this." Volary stepped forward. "They already considered me dead. Their pride was hurt because I survived." Reynolds studied her carefully. "And now that you're alive, they'll want to erase that mistake." Silence filled the room. Then Reynolds spoke again. "We can't afford a war with the auxiliary. They'll come back with a stronger force." Elias frowned. "Are you suggesting we hand her over?" Reynolds sighed. "I'm suggesting we be smart about this. Bring her to Nova Station. We'll decide what to do from there." Volary narrowed her eyes. She wasn't a piece to be moved around. Elias crossed his arms. "Understood, sir. We'll head for Nova Station." The screen went dark. Volary turned to him. You don't agree with him. Elias shrugged. I follow orders. Most of the time. She raised an eyebrow. And the rest of the time. He grinned. I make my own decisions. Valera found herself smiling. Perhaps she had chosen the right people after all. A dangerous journey. The Tempest set course for Nova Station, moving through uncharted space to avoid Silari patrols. The journey would take 3 days, and during that time, Valera had to prove herself. Some of the crew still didn't trust her. In the mess hall, she overheard whispers. She's Silari. What if she's a spy? We should have left her behind. The captain trusts her, but should we? She clenched her fists. She had heard this before, from her own people. She had been rejected by the Exilari. And now, the humans doubted her too. But she wouldn't run. If she wanted to be part of this crew, she would have to earn it. Training with the humans. On the second day, Valera walked into the training bay, where human soldiers were sparring. She watched as they moved, fast, aggressive, unpredictable. Elias stood nearby, observing the fighters. He noticed her and smirked. You interested in joining? She nodded. I need to prove myself. Elias called over one of his best fighters, Surgeon Hayes, a tall, muscular man with years of experience. Hayes rolled his shoulders. All right, princess. Let's see what you got. Valera took her stance. The fight began. Hayes moved first. Fast, powerful punches aimed at her head. But she was faster. She dodged, sidestepped, and struck back. A quick jab to his ribs made him grunt. The crew watching started murmuring in surprise. But Hayes wasn't done. He swept his leg, knocking her off balance. She hit the floor but rolled back to her feet instantly. Elias whistled. Not bad. The fight continued, both of them pushing harder. Valera's alien reflexes gave her an edge, but Hayes had experience. Then she saw an opening. She dodged left, grabbed his wrist, and twisted. In seconds, she had him pinned. The room went silent. Then Hayes laughed. All right. You win. The tension in the room shifted. She had proven herself. Elias grinned. Welcome to the crew. For the first time in her life. Valera felt accepted, but the moment didn't last. A voice echoed through the intercom. Captain, we've got a problem. An unidentified ship is approaching fast. A new threat. Valera and Elias rushed to the bridge. The screen showed a dark, angular ship, unlike anything she had seen before. It was not Silari, and it was not human. Elias frowned. Who the hell is that? The communications officer shook his head. No response to hails. The ship suddenly accelerated, heading straight for them. The weapons officer shouted. They're charging weapons. Valera's stomach twisted. This was not a random encounter. Someone else wanted her dead. Elias snapped into action. Shields up. Prepare for evasive maneuvers. The Tempest banked hard, dodging the first energy blasts. But the enemy ship was fast. It kept coming, firing relentlessly. Valera studied the enemy's attack patterns. Something about them felt familiar. This was an assassin ship. Silari intelligence units used them to eliminate high-profile targets. She turned to Elias. They are not here for you. They are here for me. Elias' jaw tightened. Then we better make sure they don't get you. The ship shook as another blast hit. Sparks flew from a console. Valera knew one thing for sure. Whoever had sent this ship wasn't going to stop. And if they wanted to survive, they had to fight back. The Tempest shook violently as another blast from the enemy ship struck its shields. Red warning lights flashed across the bridge, and alarms filled the air. Captain Elias Carter gripped the command console, his jaw tight. Damage report. The engineer's voice crackled over the comms. Shields at 60%. That last hit nearly overloaded our systems. Elias cursed under his breath. The assassin ship was unlike anything he had seen before. Fast, precise, and relentless. It wasn't just attacking. It was hunting. Beside him, Princess Valera studied the enemy's movements. "They are auxiliary trained," she said, her voice steady. "Assassins sent to eliminate threats." Elias frowned. "That means they're after you." Valera nodded. "They will not stop until I am dead." Elias clenched his fists. "Not on my watch." He turned to the weapons officer. "Target their engines. Fire everything we've got." The Tempest's cannons roared to life, sending a barrage of energy blasts toward the enemy. But the assassin ship was fast. It twisted through space with unnatural precision, dodging most of the attacks. One shot finally connected, hitting the enemy side. Sparks erupted from their hull, but they barely slowed down. The communications officer shouted, "Incoming torpedoes. Brace for impact." A desperate move. The torpedoes streaked toward them, glowing like deadly comets. Elias had only seconds to react. Evasive maneuvers. Hard right. The Tempest veered sharply, dodging one torpedo, but the second struck their rear shields. The impact sent a shockwave through the ship, knocking people off their feet. Valera grabbed the railing, steadying herself. The ship groaned under the strain. "Shields at 30%. The engineer called out. "We can't take another hit like that." Elias' mind raced. They couldn't outrun this ship. They couldn't overpower it. But maybe they could outsmart it. He turned to Valera. "You said these assassins have auxiliary training. That means they think like auxiliary, right?" Valera nodded. Elias grinned. "Then let's trick them." The trap. Elias grabbed the comms. "All hands, prepare for emergency maneuver Delta 7. We're going dark." Valera's eyes widened. "You're shutting off the power." He nodded. "If they can't see us, they'll have to guess where we are." The ship suddenly powered down. Lights flickered off. Engines went silent. Shields collapsed. To any outside sensors, it looked like the Tempest had been destroyed. The assassin ship slowed down, scanning for debris. It hesitated. The bridge was completely dark except for the faint glow of emergency screens. Elias whispered, "Wait for it." The enemy ship moved closer. Closer. Valera held her breath. Elias clenched his fist. "Now. Power up. Fire, HFY thing." The Tempest roared back to life, unleashing a full-force barrage at point-blank range. The enemy ship had no time to react. The first blasts tore through its hull, and the final explosion ripped it apart. The assassin ship vanished in a ball of fire. Silence filled the bridge. Then, cheers erupted. Valera exhaled, her heart still racing. They had won. Elias smirked. "Looks like we're still in the fight." Nowhere left to run. But the celebration didn't last long. The engineer's voice crackled over the speakers. "Captain, we have a problem." Elias sighed. "What now?" "We burned out the reactor core with that last move. Our power is failing. We need to land somewhere. Fast." Elias checked the star map. They were deep in uncharted space. The only planet nearby was a hostile, storm-covered world with no signs of civilization. Valera leaned over his shoulder. "We don't have a choice." Elias took a deep breath. "All right. Set a course for the planet. Let's hope we survive the landing." The Tempest, battered but victorious, turned toward the stormy planet below. Their battle wasn't over yet. It was just beginning. The Tempest shuddered as it entered the storm-filled atmosphere of the unknown planet. Flames licked the edges of the hull as the ship fought against gravity. The controls trembled under Captain Elias Carter's grip, and warning alarms screamed through the bridge. "We're coming in too fast," the engineer shouted. Elias gritted his teeth, braced for impact. Beside him, Princess Valera held onto the console, her knuckles white. The ship plunged through thick, swirling clouds, lightning flashing outside like the wrath of an angry god. Then, crash. The Tempest slammed into the rocky terrain, skidding through the dirt and metal debris. Sparks flew, and the ship groaned as it came to a violent stop. The force of the landing sent everyone tumbling. For a few moments, there was only silence. Then, a dim emergency light flickered on. Elias groaned and pushed himself up. Status report. The engineer coughed. Engines are completely fried. Shields are down. We're stranded. Valera pulled herself to her feet, brushing dust from her uniform. She looked at Elias. We are not alone on this planet. Elias frowned. How do you know? Valera pointed to the display screen, where strange heat signatures flickered across the sensors. Something is out there, she said, voice calm but serious. A deadly planet. Elias grabbed a survival pack and motioned to his crew. All right, listen up. We don't know what's out there, but we're not going to wait around for trouble. Valera examined the readings. The air is breathable, but the environment is unstable. We must move cautiously. The ship's main door hissed open, revealing a dark alien landscape. Jagged cliffs, twisted trees, and glowing blue mist stretched in all directions. In the distance, strange creatures howled. The ground felt wrong beneath their boots, soft, but not quite like dirt. Valera knelt and touched it. This planet is alive. It moves beneath us. Elias exhaled. Great. A living death trap. The group moved forward, weapons ready. They needed supplies, a safe place to regroup. But as they walked, the ground shifted. Then, a deep growl rumbled from below. Elias barely had time to shout, "Move," before something enormous erupted from the earth. A massive reptilian creature, its body covered in glowing scales, lunged at them with razor-sharp claws. The hunt begins. The crew scattered as the beast attacked. Elias fired his weapon, but the energy blasts bounced off its thick hide. "It's armored," Valera yelled. The creature swung its massive tail, smashing into the ground and sending Elias flying. He crashed against a rock, pain shooting through his side. Valera didn't hesitate. She grabbed a fallen weapon and leaped onto the beast's back. Her movements were swift, trained. She aimed for the creature's eyes, jabbing her blade into the soft, glowing tissue. The monster roared in pain. Elias, pushing past the pain, saw the opportunity. Keep it distracted. Valera dodged as the beast thrashed, trying to shake her off. Elias spotted a weak point, a pulsing vein along its neck. He grabbed a high-powered explosive from his pack and hurled it. Boom! The blast hit its mark. The beast staggered, then collapsed with a heavy thud. For a moment, there was only silence. Then Valera jumped down, breathing hard. She looked at Elias and gave a small nod. "You fight well." Elias smirked, rubbing his sore ribs. "You too." The hidden enemy. As they caught their breath, something else moved in the shadows. Valera's eyes narrowed. "We are being watched." Elias raised his weapon. "Whoever you are, come out." From the darkness, figures emerged. Tall, slender aliens with pale skin and glowing red eyes surrounded them. They carried primitive but deadly-looking weapons. One of them stepped forward. Their leader. He studied Valera for a long moment before speaking. "Princess Valera of the Exile, we have been expecting you." Elias exchanged a glance with her. Valera's expression hardened. "How do you know me?" The alien leader smiled darkly. "Because we are the ones who sent the assassins after you." The air was thick with tension as the pale-skinned aliens surrounded Elias and Valera. Their glowing red eyes watched closely, weapons held at the ready. The leader, tall and calm, took a step forward. "Princess Valera, your people abandoned you, but we have not." Valera clenched her fists. "Who are you?" The alien leader smiled. "We are the Volary." His voice was smooth but carried an edge of danger. "Your father's empire crushed our world long ago. Now we rise again. We know of your exile, and we offer you a choice." Elias exchanged a glance with Valera. He tightened his grip on his blaster. "What choice?" Volary asked. The Volturi leader's eyes gleamed. Join us. Help us bring down the Exilary Empire, and we will make you queen of a new order. Volary stared at him, her mind racing. She had spent her whole life trying to prove her worth to her people, only to be cast out like a mistake. Now the enemies of her people wanted to use her against them. Elias could see the storm in her eyes. You're not like them, Volary. The Volturi leader's smile faded. And you, human. He pointed his staff at Elias. We could use a warrior like you, or you can die here. Elias smirked. I've heard worse threats. The leader frowned. Then you choose death. Elias raised his blaster. No, I choose to fight. Breaking the chains. Without warning, Elias fired, striking one of the guards. Volary leaped into action, using her strength and speed to disarm another. The Volturi warriors rushed forward, but Elias and Volary fought side by side. Elias dodged a blade strike and fired again, taking down another enemy. Volary, moving with grace and fury, snapped a soldier's weapon in half and kicked him to the ground. But the Volturi leader was no ordinary warrior. He moved like a shadow, faster than the others. He struck at Volary with his staff, forcing her back. You waste your potential, he hissed. Volary blocked his attack. I make my own path. She twisted, knocking the staff from his hands. Elias saw his chance. He grabbed a fallen weapon and aimed at the leader. Game over. The leader lunged, but Volary struck first, delivering a powerful punch that sent him crashing to the ground. The remaining Volturi warriors hesitated, their leader defeated. Without him, they had no command. One by one, they retreated into the shadows. Elias let out a breath. That went well. Volary looked at the fallen leader. No, it's not over yet. A new destiny. As the dust settled, Volary turned to Elias. I know what I must do. Elias studied her. You're going back, aren't you? She nodded. I can't run forever. My people rejected me, but I am still Exilary. If they won't accept me, then I will fight for those who will. Elias smirked. So, what's the plan? Volary looked at the wreckage of their ship. We fix the Tempest, return to my homeworld, and stop this war before it begins. Elias chuckled. Sounds impossible. Volary smiled. Then it's a good thing we're both impossible people. Together, they gathered supplies and began the long task of repairing their ship. The fight wasn't over, but they weren't alone. The Tempest would fly again. And this time, Volary would not be rejected. She would decide her own fate.